Have you ever felt the weight of walking into a place and realizing, with your very first step, that people have already decided who you are without knowing a single thing about your story? I felt that the moment I crossed that door, carrying not only the shopping bags from my day, but also the exhaustion of a lifetime spent trying to be strong while the world keeps trying to make us small. And that's why, before I go on, I want you to write in the comments where you're listening from. City, state, country. Because this story didn't happen only to me. It happens every single day to women like us, in every corner of the world, and I know you're going to understand every word I'm about to say. That day, I woke up thinking it would be just another ordinary afternoon. A simple one, a few errands, quick purchases, nothing special. I had no idea that a tiny detour, the choice to walk into just any store, would be enough to expose a truth so many people try to ignore. Some look at age as if it were weakness. Some see gray hair and assume it means dependence, slowness, incapability. What they never realize is that behind all those years, there's something they can't comprehend. There's history, there's struggle, there are scars, there's wisdom, there's a strength they can't measure. And that strength began to rise in me the very moment my feet crossed that store's welcome mat. I remember the sound of the automatic doors opening as if they were presenting me to a stage where everyone had already chosen the role I was supposed to play, and I hadn't said a single word. All I did was walk in. All I did was exist. I moved through those aisles with the calmness of someone who knows she doesn't need to prove anything to anyone. But with every step, I sensed something strange in the air. A quiet murmur, disguised, almost imperceptible, yet as familiar as the pain I've felt many times before. The looks, those glances that slide across your body not to admire you, but to classify you. Quick, cold, automatic judgment. That's how it starts. First, a look. Then a barely audible whisper. A raised eyebrow. A sharp breath of impatience. Small details. Yet women like us learn to recognize these signals because we've been surrounded by them our whole lives. I kept walking, steady, because I learned long ago that dignity isn't something you ask for, it's something you carry. But when I turned down the aisle on the right, where the section I needed was located, I felt something even stronger. 3 young people were there, laughing softly, messing with their phones. But when they saw me approaching, their expressions changed, and it wasn't out of respect. It was assumption. Assuming I would take too long, assuming I would get in the way, assuming I would be that older lady who needs help with everything, the one who doesn't know, who doesn't understand, who can't keep up. Little did they know I had lived enough to solve things far more complicated than picking out an item from a shelf. But what struck me most wasn't the way they looked at me. It was the way they stepped aside, not to be polite, but out of impatience. An impatience that made no sense. But that's how it goes with mature women. Sometimes we're just existing, and the world acts as if we're an inconvenience. I ignored it and kept going, chose what I needed, took a deep breath, and moved on. But the moment I reached the counter, everything changed. It's always at the counter that the masks fall. That's where service reveals more about the one serving than the one being served. And in that instant, I knew that afternoon wouldn't be simple. The clerk lifted her eyes and looked at me the way someone looks at something fragile, ready to break. It wasn't respect. It wasn't courtesy. It was judgment, wrapped in a fake smile. She let out a sigh and said something that sounded sweet, but carried poison in between the syllables. Her tone had that condescending sweetness people use when they see an older woman as someone who needs to be guided by the hand, as if she were unable to understand her own path. And the way she treated me, well, she didn't know it yet, but that moment would become a turning point in my life. One of those moments that remind you who you really are, because the world may try to erase you, but it never succeeds. Before I answered anything, I absorbed everything around me. The looks, the way people shifted their bodies to get a better view, the expressions of impatience the moment they realized there was a woman my age at the counter. People who didn't know me but already imagined I was slow, difficult, confused. People who probably never stopped to consider what it means to age in a world that treats maturity as a flaw. People who think youth equals value and forget that everything they are today came from women like us. I felt a knot in my chest. Not from sadness, but from memory. Because that situation brought back so many moments when I had been underestimated, pushed aside, treated as if I was born to take up small spaces. But I wasn't born to fit in. I was born to leave a mark. I was born to teach. I was born to exist with dignity. And each suspicious glance that afternoon reignited something inside me I didn't even realize was still burning so brightly. And it was right there, even before the real humiliation began, that I understood this story wouldn't belong only to me. It would belong to all of us, to all the women who have ever been treated as if aging were the same as uselessness, as if gray hair needed permission to exist, as if experience were a burden, not a power. And I knew that everything that happened that afternoon was only the beginning. Because what came after that first exchange of looks, no one there was prepared to witness, and I wasn't prepared to feel what I felt next. When the clerk opened her mouth for the second time, certain that I wouldn't have the courage or the voice to respond to what she was about to do. When the clerk spoke again, it was as though she revealed the truth behind that fake smile. She leaned over the counter with an almost theatrical exaggeration, bringing her face closer to mine, as if she were dealing with someone who didn't understand the world around her. She spoke slowly, enunciating every syllable as if she were teaching me the alphabet, and that condescending tone sliced through the air like a thin blade. The way she said, "Let's take it slow, okay? Tell me what you need, nice and slow," wasn't just disrespectful. It was a direct shot at the dignity I've carried my whole life. And right then, I understood. This wasn't about service. It was about power. It was about the satisfaction some people feel when they belittle someone else, believing it makes them bigger. I looked at her for a moment, not because I was confused, but because I needed to analyze that behavior, that disdain dripping from her words. She was maybe in her early 20s, full of empty certainties, full of that arrogance that comes from believing time will never touch you. She looked at me as if I were too fragile to hold my own life together, and she had no idea that even on my most tired days, I carry more strength, more history, and more resilience than many young people who believe they're invincible. When I started to explain what I needed, she cut me off mid-sentence, raising her hand as if signaling a child to be quiet. That gesture made something stir in my stomach, not anger, but memory. I had seen that gesture before, in bosses who thought they could silence me, in people who mistook kindness for submission, in those who believed mature women should simply lower their heads. The clerk repeated the question, now louder, as if raising her voice would fix an incapacity that existed only in her imagination. "I asked what you want. I need you to speak slowly, okay? That way, I can help you properly." The emphasis on properly carried a bitterness I know all too well. Around me, I noticed a few curious glances, people who weren't there to defend me, but to observe, waiting to see just how far the humiliation would go. That's how it works. Many won't lift their voice to help, but they never miss the chance to watch. And in that moment, if you're feeling something stir inside you, I want you to write the word respect in the comments, because that's what's missing in this world. Respect for the stories held inside every mature woman. Respect for the battles that don't show on the face, but live deep in the soul. The clerk turned the computer toward herself, rolled her eyes, and let out a loud sigh, as if I were a burden, extra work, a delay in her schedule. But I knew it had nothing to do with time. It was about perception. In her mind, I wasn't a customer. I was an inconvenience, and when I noticed that expression shift on her face, something inside me moved. It wasn't anger, it was awakening, as if the deepest part of my consciousness was reminding me of who I am, what I've lived through, and everything I had to overcome to stand where I was. While she shuffled through boxes behind the counter, mumbling things to herself that she assumed I couldn't hear, each word carried that thin layer of hidden irony wrapped in fake professionalism. "There's always one of these, can't even explain what they want." I heard it, and the way she said "one of these" echoed inside me. One of what? A mature woman? A tired woman? A woman who's lived long enough to know the world isn't always kind? If she knew how many battles I've fought, how many times I had to be firm when the world tried to treat me as weak, maybe she'd think twice before treating me like I was a burden. I took a deep breath, not to hold back tears, but to hold back the urge to respond right away. because sometimes the response has to come at the right moment, with the right depth. I wanted to look her straight in the eyes and ask how someone so young could carry so much contempt inside her. But I didn't. Not yet. Something inside me said that moment was still being prepared, that before my voice came, something bigger would come first. Proof that when life wants to teach, it chooses the stage, the audience, and the timing. As she kept treating me like I was about to fall apart, I watched. I watched her gestures, her words, the impatient rhythm of her tapping foot. It wasn't about me. It never was. It was about her inability to see greatness where her eyes only saw age, about her immaturity, her lack of empathy, her lack of life experience, because people who know pain don't humiliate, people who know struggle don't belittle, people who know scars don't laugh at someone else's wound. Those who carry soul can recognize soul in another. And while she continued that performance of fake patience, I noticed others beginning to pay attention, not because they cared about me, but because her lack of respect was becoming too obvious to ignore. A woman in the back crossed her arms, her eyes glowing with something I recognized instantly: indignation. And that's why, right now, I want you to write, "I've been through this," in the comments. Because I know this story, in one form or another, spans entire generations. Age, background, culture, none of it matters. The lack of respect for mature women is universal, and every detail of that moment revealed more than the clerk ever intended to show. She came back to the counter, dropped the box on the surface with a bit of force, and asked for the third time, as if exhausted from repeating herself, "Do you understand what I'm saying?" And that was when I felt a quiet snap inside me. Not rage, clarity. The clarity that this young woman was about to learn something life eventually teaches everyone. And I realized this wasn't going to be just another purchase. It wouldn't be just another afternoon. It would be a mirror, a reflection she would never again be able to ignore. Because when life decides to teach someone, it does it with precision. In that instant, before I could even respond, I felt the air around me shift. It wasn't just my posture. It was as if everything around us was preparing for the moment when I would finally give her what she needed, not the humiliation I received, but the truth she needed to hear. The kind of truth that transforms, that corrects, that awakens, that leaves a mark. And everyone there, even without realizing, was about to witness it unfold right before their eyes. Before I could speak, the clerk made the decision that would seal everything that came next. She lifted her chin, looked over my shoulder, and called another employee in a tone that left no doubt about her intention. It wasn't a call for help. It was a performance, a display of authority. "Come here for a moment, please. We've got a situation." The other employee walked over, wiping her hands on her apron, and I could see the curious look on her face. Before she said anything, the look of someone expecting to find a problem. And then the clerk completed the scene with a smile that had nothing sweet about it. "See if you can help this little old lady here. She's not really understanding." The words hit the floor of that store like a glass shattering. I could feel the air being sucked into the lungs of the people around us, not in compassion, but in that raw curiosity people feel when watching a scene that doesn't belong to them. The silence that followed hurt more than any yell ever could. Because when humiliation happens loudly, it hurts. But when it happens in silence, when people pretend not to hear while leaning in to watch, that pain takes on a weight only those who have lived it can understand. If you've ever felt something like that, write dignity in the comments. It's incredible how certain moments remind us of the value of that word. The second employee looked at me with a mix of pity and judgment. That kind of pity that doesn't offer comfort, only diminishes. Lazy pity, automatic, built on assumptions. And she confirmed it the moment she spoke to me, using that slow, syrupy tone people use with someone they believe is incapable. "What do you need, sweetheart?" Sweetheart. A word that should feel caring, but in that moment was used like a weapon. Moments like that reveal a sad truth. To many people, mature women are nothing more than caricatures, fragile, slow, dependent. They forget that behind every wrinkle there is a story. Behind every silence, a battle. Behind every gaze, a memory no one else knows. The original clerk crossed her arms, stepped back, and watched the scene as if she'd created entertainment for herself. Her eyes gleamed with superiority. She needed others to witness it, needed her made-up authority to be recognized. And I stood there for a few seconds, watching the performance, feeling my chest warm up, not with shame, though there was some of that too, but with something deeper. An ancient strength, silent, that awakens in us when someone tries to diminish us for no reason at all. A strength born from everything we've lived, from all the days we were forced to swallow humiliation for the sake of peace. A strength that comes from the spirit. While they talked to each other about me as if I weren't even there, my mind drifted to memories I would have preferred not to revisit, but that came rushing back with painful clarity. I remembered the first time someone treated me as if I were less. I remembered how, when I was young, I had to fight for my place in a world determined to push me aside. I remembered every time someone sighed loudly because they didn't want to listen to me, every time my voice was reduced, every time my presence was diminished. These memories didn't come back to hurt me, but to awaken me, to remind me that I didn't make it this far by lowering my head. I made it this far by standing firm, surviving, resisting. The younger employee repeated the gesture, asking me to speak slowly, as if my mind couldn't keep up with the world around me. One of the customers in the back let out that little sound people make when they find something amusing, a muffled, contained laugh, but loud enough to be noticed. And that was when I felt the humiliation spread like spilled ink. It wasn't just the clerk anymore. Now the whole environment was looking at me as if I were incapable. And when several people buy into the same distorted vision, the pain multiplies. But at that same moment, something inside me began to rise, like a flame refusing to go out, a flame that didn't start that day, a flame that has been burning for generations, from the women in my family, from the stories I heard when I was young, from the wisdom passed down by my ancestors, from the certainty that behind every mature woman who walks with calmness, there is enough fire to light an entire path. I felt that flame growing, moving through me, reminding me of who I am. The clerk, eager to show what she didn't know, drew the attention of two more employees by announcing loudly, "Can someone help here? She's not understanding anything." The word anything echoed with a weight it didn't deserve. Some people stepped closer. Others pretended to keep browsing while peeking from the corners of their eyes. The discomfort in the air was so dense it felt almost touchable. The silence in the store carried a collective judgment, and I realized that moment wasn't just mine. It belonged to all women who have ever been treated like this. So if you're listening and you know what it feels like to be underestimated, comment the phrase, "I am not invisible." Public humiliation isn't built only through words. It's made of gestures, looks, body posture, impatient sighs, that hurried walk that reveals irritation. And all of that was there. My presence, simple, ordinary, was being transformed into entertainment for people who knew absolutely nothing about me. The clerk, confident in her own arrogance, turned to the group and said, "I told you, I can't understand what she wants. She's lost. Help me out here." Sensing where this was going, I felt something inside me break, but it wasn't fragility. It was the end of patience. It was the end of silence. It was the beginning of something she never expected. While the two women continued trying to decide between themselves how they should help me without even looking directly at me, I felt my body shift into a different posture. My back straightened, my shoulders lifted. My eyes found a steady point. I didn't make any sudden movements. I didn't need to raise my voice. The change happened inside, but it was so powerful that it began to show outwardly. An older woman watching from a distance placed a hand on her chest and nodded at me, as if she recognized in that exact moment the strength that was about to rise. A strength that doesn't make noise, but when it appears, it changes everything. I knew that moment was about to turn. I knew that sooner or later, that clerk would have to look into my eyes and see something she wasn't prepared to face. And as she called for more employees, like she was organizing an emergency operation around me, I felt the air in the store shift. It was as if the universe itself was taking a deep breath, waiting for the exact moment when I would finally give her the truth she was never going to forget. And so, while everyone watched, while the clerk tried to turn me into a joke, while the silence cut through the air like a knife, I understood that the pain of that moment wasn't just mine. It belonged to all of us. All the women who carry maturity in their skin and resilience in their spirit. All the women who have been reduced by eyes that don't know how to see. All the women who have been judged before being heard. This pain is shared. This pain has history. This pain has a name. And it was exactly then, at the height of public humiliation, that something inside me decided I would no longer accept the role they were trying to impose on me. I felt that ancient power fully awaken, rising through my throat, preparing the right words at the right moment, words that would turn the silence into a stage for my truth. And when I finally opened my mouth, every eye turned to me, unaware they were about to witness something that would change not only that interaction, but the entire direction of the story that was about to unfold. When I finally opened my mouth to respond, I realized I wasn't completely alone in that moment. Among the faces watching with curiosity, there was one with a different expression, a look not searching for a spectacle, but for understanding. She was a middle-aged woman, perhaps a little younger than me, standing a few feet away. She held a shopping basket in her hands, but she seemed to have forgotten all about her purchase the moment she saw how the clerk was treating me. Her eyes met mine, and in that instant, without a single word, something powerful happened. It was the silent connection between two women who know the pain of disrespect, the pain of invisibility, the pain of being judged too quickly. It was the kind of deep understanding only someone who has been diminished before can offer. And in that simple gesture, I found a circle of support I didn't even know I needed. If you understand that kind of look, comment the word strength. She tilted her head slightly, as if to say without sound, I saw it, I understand, I'm here. And at that moment, I felt something inside me align. It wasn't comfort, it was recognition. Because sometimes what we need isn't someone to speak up for us, but someone who sees, someone who acknowledges the injustice, someone who validates what we are feeling. Because humiliation hurts twice, when it happens, and when the world pretends not to notice. But she didn't pretend. She saw everything. She saw how the clerk distorted my presence, how she turned my maturity into incapacity, how she treated me with that disdain hidden under forced sweetness. And when that woman looked at me with a gaze full of empathy, I felt my own courage reorganize itself. She took a small step forward, almost imperceptible, as if coming just close enough to show she wasn't afraid to stand beside me, even in silence. It was interesting to watch how her presence unsettled the clerk. The young woman noticed the silent witness's gaze, and for a brief moment her fake smile wavered. She didn't expect anyone to pay attention, much less silently disapprove of her behavior. A flicker of guilt crossed her face, quick, subtle, but her arrogance tried to mask it, and that was the moment she made her second mistake. She underestimated not only me, but the power that two women connected by pain can radiate without saying a single word. The woman watching crossed her arms, but not aggressively. It was the posture of mature indignation, the kind that doesn't need explanation. Her eyes remained firm, tracking every movement, every word, every gesture from the clerk. And I saw something rare form in that space, a kind of silent protection. There was no need for intervention. Her presence alone balanced the room. It felt as if the energy in the store had shifted, like that witness carried with her a reminder that women like us never walk alone, that our stories weave together even when we don't know each other's names, that our pain recognizes itself, even in silence. Meanwhile, the clerk tried to go on with her performance of superiority, but I noticed how the other woman's presence made her uneasy. She tried to laugh, tried to maintain her arrogant posture, but there was tension in her face, a small tightening at the corner of her mouth, like she knew she was being judged by someone who could see right through her. And she was right, because the witness wasn't just watching. She was reading her lack of empathy, reading her contempt, reading every attitude that revealed the fragility behind her arrogance. I watched everything closely, feeling my body grow both relaxed and steady at the same time, as if that woman's presence reminded me that my voice wasn't standing alone in that room. Not because I needed someone to speak for me, but because there is something deeply comforting in knowing you're not the only one who sees what's happening. And maybe that's why so many women, when they hear stories like mine, write the phrase, "I do not accept disrespect," because it's this silent unity that strengthens us. The woman in the back took another step forward, now clearly visible, coming close enough to stand within the reach of my voice, and the clerk noticed. She noticed so much that she let out an awkward little laugh, the kind people give when they're pretending everything is under control. She glanced quickly at the coworker beside her, looking for reassurance, but found none. The second employee, sensing the tension, began to quietly step away, the way someone does when they don't want to be associated with what's happening. And that only left the clerk more exposed. She now stood alone in her arrogance, in front of two women watching her, one in silence, the other on the verge of speaking. The silent witness exchanged looks with me again. There was no pity there. There was respect, recognition, solidarity. It was as if she were saying, "I know you're about to speak, and I know you'll speak with the strength only a woman who has lived can carry." And that look was enough to reignite something inside me. I felt the weight of the humiliation lift and the presence of my own dignity take its place. Not because of her, but because that connection reminded me that women who face injustice never face it alone, even when it seems like we do. Meanwhile, other customers began noticing the tension. An older man standing near the hardware section looked at me, then at the clerk with a serious expression, as if he too sensed the imbalance in that moment. But he stayed quiet, maybe out of fear, maybe out of habit. A lot of people stay silent in the face of injustice, but his look joined the woman's, creating a small, invisible current of support that began to wrap around the entire scene. And if you understand the power of that kind of silent unity, comment, "I saw everything." The clerk, realizing her behavior was drawing far more attention than she wanted, tried to shift her tone. But it was too late. The mask had already fallen. Her voice trembled slightly as she tried once again to instruct me, as if trying to reclaim control. "Ma'am, maybe you'd like me to explain it again?" But now she wasn't speaking loudly. She wasn't carrying that arrogance anymore. The steady gaze of the silent witness had broken something inside her. The false confidence, the false authority, the false control. The woman then took a deep breath, placed her hands gently in front of her body, and watched me with a respect so profound I could feel the energy in the room change. It was as if she had taken on the role of guardian of that moment, not to speak for me, but to ensure my voice would be heard without interruption, without being diminished, without distortion. And I knew that when I finally responded, every word I spoke would find the space that had been denied to me earlier. The most remarkable thing is that the woman didn't speak a single word. She didn't defend, didn't argue, didn't confront. She didn't need to. Sometimes, the simple presence of someone who recognizes injustice is enough to destabilize the one who caused it. And in that environment loaded with disrespect, forced superiority, and improvised humiliation, her presence created balance. It was as though she represented every woman who has ever witnessed a moment like this and wished she could do something, say something, intervene somehow. But that afternoon, she was there. She saw it, she understood it, and she stayed, silent but powerful. I could feel something larger forming. It was clear this witness wasn't there by accident. Her presence in that exact instant had a purpose, the kind of coincidence life arranges so that the truth becomes impossible to ignore. And when our eyes met for the third time, I felt the turning point approaching, and right there, in the quiet exchange of glances and the first shadows of courage beginning to appear, I realized the story was about to change directions. The flame inside me grew stronger, and the clerk, without realizing it, was setting the stage for the response I would give, a response no one there expected, and one that would change not only that moment, but everything that came after. When the entire store seemed suspended in that heavy silence, I felt the moment that had been rising inside me finally hit its peak. It wasn't explosion. It wasn't loss of control. It was clarity. A clarity so deep, it felt like it illuminated not only my mind, but the entire space around me. The clerk, already uncomfortable with the presence of that silent witness, tried to compose herself, adjusting her clothes, fiddling with her hair, pretending to have a calm she no longer possessed. And it was exactly then that I lifted my head and let my voice come out in the simplest, most direct way, without raising it, without losing dignity, but with the firmness of someone who knows her worth down to the root. I looked straight at her and said, "You talk to me as if I don't understand anything, but you have no idea who I am." Those words moved through the air like a quiet wave, but one so full of meaning that even the customers pretending not to watch stopped and listened. The clerk blinked several times, stunned, like someone who'd just taken a blow. She opened her mouth to reply, but no words came. It was as if the ground had slipped from under her feet, and I could see the mask finally beginning to crack. I continued, with the calmness of someone who doesn't need to prove anything, but chooses to reveal. "You treat me as if I haven't lived, as if I never learned anything along the way, but I spent 40 years teaching people. I was a teacher, and not just any teacher. I taught hundreds of young people who grew up, graduated, built their lives on the foundation of what I taught them." And the moment I said this, the energy in the store shifted again. The woman watching in the back smiled, not a wide smile, but one of recognition, as if she had been waiting for exactly this, for me to reclaim my own story. The clerk, still shaken, stepped back. It was as if, for the first time, she actually saw me, as if my words had torn away the fog of inferiority she had tried to place over me. And I didn't stop there, because I knew that moment needed to be complete. It needed to make clear that the version of me they had created was nothing but a reflection of their own ignorance, not the truth of who I am. "I was a school principal for more than 10 years, I continued, feeling my voice take on that quiet strength that only comes with truth. I was responsible for managing entire teams, dealing with parents, students, professionals. I've solved problems much bigger than buying something at a store counter. I've led important meetings, made difficult decisions, guided projects that changed lives. And as I spoke, I felt the power of those memories moving through me, reigniting the woman I had always been." The clerk, now visibly shaken, lowered her eyes, and the woman who had been watching crossed her arms firmly, tilting her head as if to say, "That's it, keep going." Other customers began stepping closer, and even in silence, their expressions showed that now they too were listening, not to a customer, but to a woman with a story, a legacy, a voice. And in that moment, if you understand the importance of honoring your own journey, write the word "story" in the comments. Because that's what life tries to steal when people treat us as incapable. The story we built, with so much sacrifice. The clerk forced a nervous smile, trying to recover. I didn't know," she murmured, and I replied, still with the same calm rising inside me. "Of course you didn't know, because you didn't ask. You didn't try to listen. You decided who I was the moment you looked at me." And that truth hit not only her, but everyone standing around. It was as if I had held up a mirror in front of them, showing the reflection of the small violences people commit without even noticing. The employee who had been called initially took another step back, clearly uncomfortable. She looked quickly toward the woman witnessing everything and found in her eyes not a threat, but a silent reprimand, the kind that doesn't need words to be understood. It was as if the weight of what they had done fell on both of them at the same time. And that moment, that exact moment, began to turn the tide. I took a breath and continued, not to humiliate, but to clarify. "I'm not a helpless little old lady. I'm a woman who spent her life teaching others how to be human. I helped shape doctors, lawyers, mothers, fathers, workers, people who today hold important positions, people who help build the society you live in." The clerk opened and closed her hands nervously, and I saw something in her eyes that hadn't been there before. Shame. Not the shame that destroys, but the shame that teaches. The woman who had been watching from the beginning took another step, this time more firm, positioning herself just a few feet from me. She didn't speak, but her posture said everything. "I witnessed it. I support you." And I felt that strength travel across the space between us like an invisible embrace. These silent connections between women are like threads of light that hold us up when the world tries to dim us. And if you've ever felt that, comment, "I support women." The clerk tried one last time to regain control of the situation. "I was just trying to help," she murmured weakly. And I answered, still calm, "Helping isn't speaking loudly as if I can't understand. Helping isn't calling someone else as if I were a problem to be fixed. Helping isn't treating me as if I'm incapable. Helping begins with respect. The word respect left my mouth with such weight that it seemed to fill the entire store. When I said that, I saw the clerk breathe deeply, almost as if swallowing her own haste, her own impatience, her own arrogance. She no longer had the easy words she used before. Her posture changed. Her chin, once lifted, now dipped slightly. Her gaze, once superior, now tried to understand. It was as if she had been forced, for the first time, to truly see. I went on, because my story needed to be told to the very end. You look at me and see age, but you don't see the path I've walked. You don't see the battles I've won. You don't see the strength I carry. Age doesn't diminish me. It honors me. When I finished that sentence, a younger customer standing behind the woman nodded in respect. It was as if my words had touched people who hadn't expected to hear something so deep that day. The woman who had witnessed everything took a deep breath, as if she were proud without needing to say a word. Her eyes shone with the strength of someone who recognizes greatness. And I knew, by the way she looked at me, that what I had just revealed wasn't only about me. It was about all of us. It was about reminding the world that mature women carry history, honor, wisdom, and enough strength to light an entire path. It was impossible not to notice how the energy inside that store had shifted completely. The clerk could no longer hold up the arrogant image she had built. The customers who had once been amused spectators now watched with respect. And I knew that this revelation was only the first step toward something even bigger that was about to unfold. Because at that moment, the entire store was learning a lesson that didn't come from any book, but from life. I kept my eyes steady on the clerk and said calmly, "The next time you look at a woman like me, remember you might be talking to someone who's walked much farther than you could ever imagine." And when I finished that sentence, the woman who had been silently accompanying me from the very beginning took a deep breath and for the first time smiled with a quiet pride that seemed to say, "Now, yes, now she understands." And I knew that wouldn't be the final word of what was still coming. In truth, it was only the door opening for the next moment, far more decisive, far more powerful, far deeper than anyone in that store could have imagined. When I finished speaking, it felt as if the entire store held its breath. The clerk, who minutes earlier had radiated that false superiority, now stood face to face with something she couldn't control, the truth. And truth, when it arrives calmly, without shouting, wrapped in dignity, carries a strength no arrogance can withstand. I looked at her without hurry, without anger, without any need to prove superiority. It was simply the serenity of someone who knows exactly who she is, someone with years of experience, years of scars, years of battles that shaped her character. And that serenity filled the space that moments before had been flooded with humiliation. The clerk took a small step back, as if trying to distance herself from her own shame. She fidgeted with her fingers, glanced around, searching for support where there was none anymore. Because people who humiliate others are usually bold only when they think no one is paying attention. But when the spotlight turns toward them, when they realize they're exposed, when the look in other people's eyes shows disapproval, their false courage disappears. I watched it unfold right in front of me. She couldn't hold that facade anymore. And I knew this was the perfect moment for the turning point. The moment when emotional justice happens without shouting, without aggression, without humiliation, only with truth. I took a slow breath, and while organizing my thoughts, I saw the woman who had been the silent witness step a little closer. Not enough to seem like interference, but enough to make it clear she was present. She was there. She wasn't stepping back. That invisible support gave me even more steadiness, not because I needed it, but because there's something beautiful about two women recognizing each other in a moment of injustice, something beautiful about one woman's strength meeting the strength of another, something beautiful about silence shifting from something that hurts to something that protects. Then I spoke, not harshly, but precisely. You treated me as if I weren't capable, as if I weren't intelligent, as if I hadn't lived long enough to know how to explain myself. She opened her mouth to interrupt, but I lifted my hand gently, not to silence her, but to ensure I could finish without being cut off, something mature women know all too well. I don't need you to apologize. What I want is for you to understand what you did. The silence that filled the store in that moment felt almost physical, like a wave spreading across the floor, across the shelves, across every body around us. The clerk swallowed hard. The woman who had watched everything smiled with a mix of approval and relief, and I continued. You have no idea how many women have been treated exactly like this. How many have gone through this kind of silent humiliation? How many have been belittled by people who knew nothing about their lives? And that's why this has to stop. If you listening to this understand the weight of these words, write, "I value myself" in the comments. The clerk tried to justify herself. I was just trying to help. Her voice trembled, fragile, like someone trying to hold up a castle built on sand. And I answered firmly, helping is not speaking loudly as if the other person can't understand. Helping is not referring to someone as the old lady. Helping is not making an adult feel small. My words were heavy, but not cruel. I didn't want to destroy her. I wanted to awaken her, because sometimes life puts us in situations where we must teach those who were never taught. She lowered her eyes, and for the first time since I had entered that store, I saw sincerity on her face. Not fully formed, but the beginning of something. The beginning of recognition. The beginning of understanding. The woman who had watched everything took one more step forward, even closer now. And that made the clerk lift her head and face not just me, but everyone around her who had witnessed the lesson she would never forget. I continued, unhurried, because truth doesn't need to rush. I was a teacher for many years, and one thing I learned is that not every mistake comes from malice. Sometimes it comes from lack of maturity, lack of awareness, lack of empathy. She took a long breath, as if absorbing every word. And what you did here today doesn't reveal who I am. It reveals who you are. That sentence struck her like a silent arrow. She looked at me with eyes wide open, more attentive, more aware, as if she were seeing for the first time the seriousness of what she had done, as if her own conscience were calling her forward. And that's exactly what happens when emotional justice arrives. It doesn't humiliate, it illuminates. It shows where the shadow is so the person can finally see. The clerk took a breath, and this time didn't try to justify herself, didn't defend herself, didn't hide behind forced smiles. She just stood there, facing me, confronting the truth. I could see she wanted to apologize, but didn't know how. And I understood that my posture in that moment was the key to transforming the situation into something greater than a simple correction. It was about teaching, not belittling. It was about proving that mature women don't need to raise their voices to be respected, that our strength isn't in shouting, it's in presence, that our wisdom doesn't come wrapped in harsh words, but reveals itself in calm. The silent witness crossed her arms and straightened her posture, looking proud of what was happening. Her presence felt like a lighthouse. I glanced at her briefly, and she nodded slowly as if saying, "Go on, she's listening now." I turned back to the clerk. "I hope that next time, you think before speaking, think before judging, think before deciding who someone is based on nothing." She nodded, shy, almost childlike, as if she were finally understanding that life had handed her a lesson she couldn't learn from a book, a lesson that comes only from human interaction, from sensitivity, from empathy. The entire environment seemed to breathe with me. It was tangible. It felt like everyone there was absorbing a bit of that truth. An older man near the hardware aisle cleared his throat, as if signaling silent agreement. The young customer in the back smiled faintly, and the woman who had watched everything narrowed, her eyes with pride, as if she were saying, "That's how it's done. That's how you keep your dignity." I took one step toward the clerk, not to intimidate her, but so she could hear me clearly. Age doesn't make me incapable. Age makes me experienced. Age doesn't weaken me. Age strengthens me. And I hope you never forget that. The word strengthens echoed in the air, and I noticed a few people nodding, as if those words were meant for them too. If you feel that strength in yourself, comment, "My age is my power." The clerk took a long breath, and for the first time, looked directly into my eyes. And in her gaze, I saw something that hadn't been there before. Respect. Not the fake kind born from fear of consequence, but genuine respect. From someone who finally understood she had been standing in front of someone far greater than she assumed. And for me, that was enough. I didn't want anything else. Just transformation, recognition, understanding, all without humiliation, without extra pain, without petty revenge, because women like me don't strike back with cruelty. We strike back with wisdom, with poise, with presence, and when we do, the world notices. The woman who had witnessed everything took a step closer to my side, as if wanting to stand with me. Her eyes were glowing with that fire of feminine strength that only women who have endured injustice recognize. And I knew, in that moment, that something much greater was being built there, something that would last beyond that store, beyond that clerk, beyond that moment. I knew the story wasn't over yet, and what came next would be even stronger, even more revealing, even more transformative, because life was preparing the next step, and everyone there was about to witness it. When I finished speaking, the store fell into a silence so thick it felt like it filled every corner, every shelf, every gaze. It was the kind of silence that doesn't come from fear, but from awareness. The awareness that something important had just happened, something no one expected to witness on that ordinary day, at that ordinary hour, at that counter that, just seconds before, had been nothing more than a place to pay for items. The clerk, once so full of herself, now looked smaller, not because I had diminished her, but because she was finally seeing her own mistake clearly. It was the first time she'd stood face to face with the consequences of her behavior without being able to escape. Her eyes flickered, her posture slackened, and I could tell she was absorbing every word that had come from my mouth, not as an attack, but as truth. And it's incredible how truth has the power to transform an entire room. It arrives quietly, slowly, but once it settles, no one can pretend they don't see it. The clerk lowered her eyes, clasped her hands in front of her, and took a deep breath, as if trying to hold back something pulsing inside her. Shame. But not the kind of shame that destroys. It was the kind that teaches, that reshapes, that forces a person to look inward and face their own flaws. The store remained still, customers frozen in the middle of the aisle, holding items they had already forgotten they were even choosing. Everyone watched without saying a word, but each face carried a different expression: surprise, respect, reflection. And then, almost symbolically, the silent witness took another step forward, not to intervene, not to confront, but to make her presence unmistakably clear. She looked at me with a small smile, one full of pride. That smile said more than any sentence ever could. It was as if she were telling me, "You just did what so many of us have wished we had the courage to do, and you did it with dignity." Her posture was firm, upright, confident, the kind of posture born from recognition. She knew she had just witnessed something far beyond correcting a disrespectful clerk. She had witnessed a stand being taken for all mature women who have ever been treated as invisible. And when our eyes met, I felt a warm wave cross my chest, not a weak emotion, but a sense of belonging, a sense of shared strength. An older man near the hardware aisle slowly removed his hat and gave a slight nod, an old gesture of respect rarely seen these days. It was subtle but sincere, as if he recognized that he wasn't just watching a customer speak up, but a woman using her words the way someone wields a sharp blade, with precision and purpose. A young woman behind him rested her hand on her cart and nodded, the kind of nod that comes when you finally witness emotional justice happening in a place where silent injustice had taken root. And if you're feeling this as you listen, write in the comments, "I respect myself." The clerk tried to speak, but no sound came. What escaped was only a fragile breath, a failed attempt to regain the control she had lost. Her face flushed, not from anger, but from embarrassment. Her hands trembled slightly. And it wasn't because I had been harsh. It was because she finally understood the depth of her own disrespect. Sometimes life teaches loudly. Other times, it teaches in silence. But that day, she learned through calmness. And calm, when filled with truth, can be devastating. The second employee, the one who had been called over to help me, stepped back, visibly uncomfortable, perhaps realizing that even if she wasn't the main source of the humiliation, she had participated by going along with it. She glanced at me briefly, as if searching for silent forgiveness, but I wasn't there to judge anyone. I wasn't a judge, or an executioner, or a woman who needs to shout to prove her worth. I was simply myself, whole, steady, aware of the weight of my own story. And that, in that moment, was enough to reorganize the energy around me. The floor of the store seemed to breathe with me. Every step people took was almost soundless, as if they were afraid of breaking that collective moment of reflection unfolding there. The clerk finally lifted her face and looked at me. It wasn't the arrogant look she had worn before. It was a vulnerable, fragile, almost childlike look, like someone seeing for the first time the woman I truly was, not the old lady she had imagined. She tried to speak again, but her voice failed her once more. It was as if she were wrestling with her own emotional limitations, trying to find a way to rebuild herself after realizing the moment had grown far bigger than her. I took a deep breath, not because I was tired, but because the moment deserved depth. It was as if life were showing me that some battles don't come to hurt us, but to remind us of our size. And in that instant, it became clear. I had nothing to prove. I never did. What I did in that store wasn't for me. It was for every woman who has swallowed the pain of disrespect, for every woman who has been treated as incapable, for every woman who has been silenced. And if you're one of them, write in the comments, "I don't bow my head." The silent witness then placed her hand over her chest, not dramatically, but gently, like someone acknowledging another person's courage. That simple gesture felt like an embrace without touch, support without words, a silent recognition between two lives that crossed for just a few minutes. And I knew, without a shadow of doubt, that this woman carried her own pain, her own scars, her own battles. Her eyes told me that. Her eyes said she had likely lived something similar. And in that moment, she understood that my response was also her response. The store manager, who hadn't shown up until then, came down the central aisle, drawn by the tension in the air. He looked around quickly, trying to piece together what happened. The expression on his face shifted when he saw the clerk ashamed and the firm posture I held. He didn't need anyone to explain anything. He understood just by looking, and without saying a word, he directed a serious stare at the clerk, the kind of stare that means, "We're going to talk about this later." The clerk lowered her head. You could tell the reality of the moment had hit her. The energy in the room was completely different. It was as if I had unknowingly carried a mirror into that store, a mirror that reflected people's weaknesses, their prejudices, the societal pressure that tries to convince mature women they no longer hold value. But right there, in that aisle, in front of all those people, something became undeniably clear. Value does not fade with time. It grows, it deepens, it solidifies. A young woman standing near the perfume section slowly approached. She didn't say a word, but her eyes were full of something I recognized immediately: admiration. The kind of admiration not directed at appearance, but at posture, at character, at the way someone faces injustice with grace, without losing firmness. She gave me a small nod, acknowledging the strength in my reaction. Silent, but sincere. The clerk, completely undone, now finally managed to murmur, I shouldn't have spoken to you that way." Her voice was low, fragile, shaky. She looked like she was fighting the urge to cry, not because I had been cruel, but because for the first time she saw exactly what she had done. And that's rare, very rare. People who humiliate others rarely see their own behavior. But that day, she saw it. She understood it. She learned from it. And I knew that lesson would stay with her forever. I looked at her for a few seconds and said, "What matters isn't what you did. It's what you're going to do from this day forward." That sentence moved through the store like both a plea and a command. It was an invitation to grow, a reminder of responsibility, and at the same time, an open door for change. Because mature women know this. Correcting someone isn't about destruction. It's about rebuilding. It's opening someone's eyes. It's showing them what they failed to see. The woman who had been with me from the beginning let out a relieved sigh, as if she had been holding her breath the whole time and could finally breathe freely again. She came closer, standing beside me, not invading my space, but sharing that moment with me. And I felt she wanted to say something, but held back, because sometimes silence speaks louder. Sometimes silence is more powerful than any word. And in that moment, her silence was saying, "Thank you. Thank you for doing what I might never have had the courage to do." The store remained silent, but now it was a different silence. It was no longer the silence of humiliation. It was the silence of reflection. the silence of transformation. The kind of silence that comes after truth is spoken with firmness, and I knew that, without even noticing, I had left a mark on every person there. A mark that wouldn't fade easily. A mark built from respect, dignity, and strength. And so, while the clerk tried to gather herself and the store slowly began to return to its usual rhythm, I realized something important. I wasn't there just as a customer. I was there as an instrument of a lesson. I was there to show that mature women are not invisible, not weak, not incapable. They are pillars, they are roots, they are living history, and many times the world needs to be reminded of that. But I knew the moment wasn't over yet. There was more to happen, more to be revealed. Life hadn't closed the circle, and I felt inside me that the next part would be even more revealing. Not for the clerk, not for the witnesses, but for me. When I finally left the store, the air outside felt different. It was as if I had walked through a doorway that didn't just lead to the street, but to a part of myself I had forgotten for a while. My steps were steady, but each one carried a strange weight, a mix of exhaustion and clarity. The truth is that even after handling the clerk the way I did, the whole scene stayed in my mind. Maybe because it opened old wounds, maybe because it awakened memories I had, buried to avoid the pain, or maybe because it touched that quiet place inside where we store our stories, hidden from everyone else. As I walked toward the bus stop, the image of the woman who witnessed everything kept replaying in my mind. The way she looked at me, the way she stepped forward, the way she stayed. That wasn't just empathy, that was recognition. It was as if she saw something in me that reminded her of her own journey. Mature women carry this gift, the ability to recognize in others what the world tries to hide, the dignity, the silent strength, the deeply rooted resilience. I felt it in her, and I felt it in myself. And if you listening to this have ever felt that kind of silent recognition, write in the comments, "I see myself in you." The sun was beginning to set on the horizon, spreading that reddish glow that only comes at the end of the afternoon. And as I walked, I found myself remembering my mother. She always said that life tests us in the most unexpected moments, and that each test carries a hidden message. I remember her sitting in the yard, sewing something, her voice calm and sure as she said, "Daughter, the world will try to make you forget who you are, but you can't let it." And in that moment, that phrase rose inside me like an ancient prayer, a prayer that doesn't need to be spoken to be felt. I stepped onto the bus and sat by the window. The sounds of the street began blending with my thoughts, creating a strange kind of inner silence. A silence I know well, the silence of reflection, the silence that arrives after pain, after confrontation, after courage. A silence that prepares the heart to understand what really happened. And it was in that silence that I realized something important. That humiliation wasn't just an isolated event. It had been a mirror, a reminder, a call from life urging me to look at my own journey with more care. As the bus made its way down the avenue, passing buildings, sidewalks, and faces that came and went, I thought about how many times in life women like me have been underestimated. How many times we've been treated as if our intelligence had an expiration date, as if maturity dimmed our shine, as if our stories no longer had a place. It happens in stores, in hospitals, in waiting rooms, in casual conversations. The world insists on devaluing a woman as she ages, as if age were a burden and not an achievement. And it was there, sitting on that bus, that I understood just how deeply that hurts. Not because we're weak, but because we know life has taught us so much, yet many people still refuse to see it. I thought of my grandmother, a woman with steady hands, bare feet in the yard, a tired smile, but eyes so wise they looked like they carried the entire world inside them. She used to say, "Growing older isn't weakness. Weakness is not learning from time." And as I remembered her voice, I felt something warm rising through my chest, a mix of longing and strength. My grandmother knew things I only understood years later, and the greatest of them was this: the dignity of a mature woman isn't in what the world sees, it's in what she carries. With every turn the bus made, my thoughts went deeper. I thought about the clerk, about the manager, about the people who witnessed everything. Each of those people had walked away carrying a piece of my story, a piece of my stance, a piece of my truth, and whether they wanted to or not, it would change them. Because truth, when spoken, calmly, with clarity, with maturity, leaves a mark. It stings a little, but heals a lot. Curiously, as I reflected, I realized the pain I'd felt in the store no longer had the same weight. It had transformed. It wasn't sadness anymore. It was awareness. It was wisdom. It was as if I had crossed some kind of silent ritual where humiliation turned into learning. And that learning became part of me, just like so many other hurts once had. If you've lived something like this, comment, "My pain teaches me." When the bus neared my street, I felt that familiar sense of relief, as if I were returning not only home, but back to myself. I stepped off slowly, noticing the trees, the soft breeze, the distant sound of a radio playing in someone's kitchen. It was all so simple, yet so comforting. It was in this space, within the quiet of my own home, that I knew I'd be able to process everything more deeply. Because home isn't just where we live, it's where we find ourselves again. I walked inside, slipped off my shoes, and placed my bag on the table. I went to the living room window, opened the curtains, and let the orange light of the setting sun fill the space. I stood there, staring at the sky, feeling a small knot inside me begin to loosen. A knot made of exhaustion, indignation, old memories. Little by little, that knot softened, turning into something else, into understanding, into clarity, into calm. I sat in the armchair where I always sit when I need to think, and for the first time since leaving the store, I let my body fully relax. I closed my eyes and took a deep breath. My mind drifted back to the clerk, not to judge her, but to understand. Because sometimes people hurt others without realizing it. Sometimes they repeat behaviors they learned. Sometimes they carry their own ignorance like a stone in their pocket, without even noticing the weight. That doesn't excuse anything, but it explains a lot, and understanding that brought me a certain kind of healing. I also remembered the woman who watched everything in the store, and that memory warmed my heart, because even without saying a single word, she had been part of my strength, part of my posture, part of my courage. That's how it is among women. When one rises, all rise a little. When one speaks, all find a voice. When one stands her ground, all feel seen. I felt that deeply. And if you believe in that too, comment, "We are not alone." As the sky darkened, I felt my hands resting on my lap with a peace. So deep, it was as if my entire soul had settled back into place. My reflection on that day wasn't just about a rude clerk. It was about the world, about the ways people still try to erase the essence of mature women, about how they try to reduce our stories to a gesture, a sentence, a glance. But the truth is this: no one diminishes a woman who knows her own strength. No one erases a story written with tears, with struggle, with resilience. I got up, grabbed a glass of water, and walked slowly through the house. Every step felt lighter than the last, and I realized that even though the day had begun with fatigue and humiliation, it was ending with clarity and healing. A healing that didn't come from the clerk, or the witnesses, or the store. It came from me, from how I chose to respond, from how I turned pain into wisdom, from how I refused to let that moment dim the light of the woman I am. I ran my hand through my hair, closed my eyes again, and in that instant, something profound settled inside me. Growing older hadn't taken anything from me. It had given everything back. It gave me my voice, my courage, my essence. The woman who walked out of that store was not the same woman who walked in, and the one who returned home was even more whole. But inside, I still felt that something was missing, something that would complete that cycle, something that would make everything even clearer, firmer, truer. And I knew it was close, so close it felt like it was breathing around me, waiting for the right moment to reveal itself. I stayed there inside my house, feeling the light weight of a revelation that comes only when the soul finally finds a place to rest. It was curious how one ordinary day could open so many inner doors, how a small moment could awaken such deep memories, how a humiliation could turn into something much bigger than pain. I looked down at my hands, hands that had held so many things, hands that had gripped other hands in painful farewells, hands that had soothed feverish children, hands that had written notes, letters, exams, reports, hands that carried history, and I felt proud of them. The silence in my home wrapped around me like a blanket, not the kind that suffocates, but the kind that heals, the kind only mature women know, the silence that speaks louder than 1,000 words, the silence that holds wisdom, the silence no one can take from us. And it was right there, in that moment, that I understood more deeply what life had wanted to teach me that day. It wasn't about the clerk. It wasn't about the store. It was about me, about my journey, about everything I've become. It was never the humiliation that defined me. It was the response I chose to give, the way I decided to stand, the way I turned weight into posture, pain into clarity, offense into strength. Once you understand that, everything changes. Because nothing is more powerful than a woman who has learned to use her silence as a shield and her voice as a blade. A woman like that doesn't need to prove anything. She simply exists, and existing is power enough. As I watched the sky grow darker, I felt something shining inside me. The simple, deep certainty that every chapter of my life, even the bitter ones, had prepared me for moments like this. Age didn't shrink me. It expanded me. It deepened me. It gave me eyes that see further, a heart that doesn't bow, a soul that doesn't break. That's why I always say, never underestimate the silence of a mature woman. The world thinks it's calm, but has no idea its power. The world thinks it's fragility, but doesn't know its emotional discipline. The world thinks it's weariness, but doesn't understand it's the wisdom of battle. Life has a curious way of showing us who we are. Sometimes it uses pain, sometimes disrespect, sometimes injustice. And that day, it used a clerk who knew nothing about me to remind me of something essential. I don't need to be seen to be strong. I don't need applause to be whole. I don't need understanding to have worth. My worth isn't in my appearance. It's in my journey, in the road I've walked, in the battles I've fought, in the courage I carry quietly in my chest. And as that understanding settled inside me like fine dust falling to the floor, I felt a peace I didn't expect to feel so soon. The peace of someone who knows she left nothing unsaid. The peace of someone who responded without hurting. The peace of someone who taught without yelling. The peace of someone who chose to be bigger than the pain of the moment. A peace that reminded me of my mother, my grandmother, my ancestors, all the women who came before me and turned their own silence into strength so that I could turn mine into wisdom. The lesson from that day echoed inside me with the force of an ancient truth. Never underestimate a woman who has lived long enough to recognize her own cycles, her own shadows, and her own light. Never underestimate the steadiness of someone who learned to stand up, alone. Never underestimate the gaze of someone who has watched the world try to break her and stayed standing anyway. Time didn't take anything from me. Time gave me everything. And as I adjusted the blanket over my legs and let my body fully unwind, I felt my mind, my heart, and my spirit aligned in a way I hadn't felt in a long time. It was as if life were whispering softly that there was still so much to learn, so much to teach, so much to share. In that quiet moment, I realized that every story has a purpose, and the next one carries its own strength, its own truth, its own healing. So before you go on with your day, let me say something simple but profound. The video that's appearing on your screen right now carries another powerful story, different from this one, but born from the same essence, the same soul, the same universe of women who turn pain into destiny. It's waiting for you with another reflection, another emotion, another truth you may need to hear today. Go to it. Your journey continues there.